Windmills like ghosts of time. A reminder of the 600 years beginning in the 13th century, during which the Turks built an empire that stretched from Anatolia as far as the coasts of present-day Tunisia. Before and after the Turks, many other invaders and colonizers landed on the shores of Tunisia and built cities and harbors. They came from the east, from the west, from the north and the south. The Phoenicians and the Romans were first. Their fleets made landfalls on this coastline, seeking out the same safe anchorages that would later appeal to the Turks. The imposing forts they built are now ghostly piles of stone scattered throughout a region that is made up of several layers of history in the making. Vestiges of the past that have much in common, though from different ages. Like the Turkish castle of Umtsuk. In the 17th century, it was the base of a famous pirate called Dragut. Invasion after invasion swept through this country. But the last, that of the Arabs, was definitively victorious. For the last 1,000 years, the Arabs have represented the cultural, religious, military, and social reality in that part of North Africa that they converted to Islam and called Maghreb. Some of their oldest monumental buildings are still in use today and contribute to the magic of this land where past and present are an integral part of daily life. The walls that protected the towns and cities built between the sea and the desert are no longer defenses against predators, but live on as noble symbols of a glorious past. The same is true of the mosques. The newer ones echo the sumptuousness of those that are centuries old. Their style remains faithful to tradition, to the ghostly stones of the Maghreb that are the subject of this film. Between the sea and the desert lies one of the Maghreb's oldest mosques, built in Kairouan, using columns from an ancient Roman temple. It has survived for 1,400 years. Signs of use around the edges of this well are a measure of its age. A ghost that is now being restored to its former splendor. There is another famous building in Kairouan, another sacred stone ghost, the Barber's Mosque, so called because it contains the tomb of a holy man who lived in Mecca at the same time as Muhammad. According to legend, he achieved sainthood by trimming the prophet's beard every day. We continue along our route between desert and sea, towards the lost towns of the Maghreb, where ancient buildings are full of memories of past events, some of them surprising. Few people are aware, for example, that in the island oasis of Jerba, a Jewish colony has lived side by side with the Muslims for many centuries. These women have no affinity with ghosts, but they dress, live, and work their wool in much the same way as their ancestors in biblical times. Their men are pottery makers. They still model their products out of clay and bake them in ovens that have been in use, in a manner of speaking, for almost 2,000 years. ever since the Roman Emperor Titus Augustus destroyed the temple in Jerusalem in 100 AD. The Jews of Israel were forced to flee their homeland and pray in synagogues scattered throughout the world. One of the oldest is this one in Jerba. A synagogue and a minaret, almost side by side. An unlikely scenario in other places, but in this oasis, it has always been that way. The secret of the serene way of life of some of the surviving isolated communities of the Maghreb lies in the respect for the simple rules of an austere way of life, which, here at least, the frenzy of modern life has been unable to destroy. This souk, the typical Arab marketplace, has the same light plays, the same smells, confusion, and hubbub of times long ago. For 1,000 years, it has maintained its original image more or less intact. This beach, which now hosts peaceful fishermen, was once the site of landings by the Phoenicians, the Greeks, the Arabs, the Spanish, and the forces of Byzantium. And above all, it served as a landfall for cargo vessels and warships flying the flag of Rome. It was here that a Roman fleet, its sails billowing in the winds of war, landed the army that destroyed Carthage, the capital city of this region from the 4th to the 2nd century BC. Sun-baked stones, a reminder of a vanquished people who were wiped off the face of the earth in the wake of a ferocious battle in which no pity was shown for the losers. The stone ghosts of the Carthaginians. Eloquent likenesses in a primitive style. Survivors of an annihilation that was so complete, it destroyed all the symbols of the religion, language, and culture of a whole civilization, leaving behind only funerary inscriptions. Although agriculture was almost non-existent here for hundreds of years, today the land is cultivated to provide produce for people used to eking out a meager existence. Bulldozing the land often brings to light vestiges of the past. Mosaics are uncovered that evoke other ghosts, those of the Roman settlers who turned the Maghreb into a rich agricultural colony that they called the African province. Farmhouses like this were to be found by the hundreds in the territories known as Africa. Prosperous production centers where Roman landowners lived like kings. These mosaics are evidence of their luxurious way of life. More evidence is provided by the imposing stone ghosts to be found in their cities. The Maghreb boasts the most extensive and most magnificent ruins of the Roman Empire. The Temple of Mercury, built in the 3rd century AD in Duga, that flourished when Septimus Severus was emperor in Rome. Another ghost city is Sbetla, which Roman farmers made prosperous, as can be seen from the magnificence of the capital and the size of the Forum. Its inhabitants changed the desert sand dunes and arid rocky terrain into arable land. Fertile olive groves and wheat fields stretched as far as the eye could see. In the theaters of those cities now populated only by shadows, vast crowds would gather to enjoy the latest works of Rome's most successful playwrights. These are the marble remains of a rich landowner's villa. In the background, the fields of his estate. The remains of his peasants' and slaves' quarters. And the aqueduct. It delivered abundant fresh water from a distant spring. Ghosts of an era which knew how to transform the desert into green fields. A glorious achievement, honored in its own time with triumphal arches like this, dedicated to Severus Alexander. While serving as governor of this province, he supplied Rome's granaries with enough wheat to satisfy the daily requirements of the imperial capital's 1 million inhabitants. Temples, columns, the public forum with its triumphal arches, hewn stone, sculptured marble, ornate capitals. However impressive these ruins are, none of them can compare with those of El Gem. This arena is 148 meters long, 122 wide, and 36 high, and could hold 36,000 spectators. Now, a mute ghost of Africa's largest Colosseum. In spite of damage inflicted during the many battles that were fought to win control of the city, and the fact that for centuries the local population used it as a quarry, the Colosseum is still magnificent. It dominates the horizon and towers indignantly over the suburb that has sprung up in its shadow. When the Arabs conquered the Maghreb, the African Colosseum had long been abandoned to the ravages of time. The Muslims imposed their own simple, austere rule on the region. And soon the opulence of the proud Roman province was no more than a memory. The desert reclaimed its territory, and forts and cities became lifeless shadows of their former glory, ghostly piles of stone in an ever more arid land. Without the protection of the empire, the outer edge of the Maghreb became the domain of armed predators. Peasants survived by becoming troglodytes, hiding their homes by digging them into the ground. In the area known as Matmata, close to modern homes, these holes still hide an underground city, a ghost not of stone, but in the stone. The peasants hid in these deep, shadowy depths when the desert raiders arrived. Berber peasants and herdsmen used to live here. They were another of the Maghreb's ethnic groups. Now their villages, too, are like ghosts from the past. The Berbers were either massacred or driven out of the valleys to which they had brought prosperity. And it was, of course, their wealth that attracted repeated raids by armies on horseback that swept through here like famished locusts. Rich, fertile tracts of land were abandoned and slowly reabsorbed by the desert. outer edges of the world of shadows, small oases have survived man's disappearance, a stark and striking contrast between life and death. In recent years, an old train leaves from a small station in the Maghreb at Metlawi. The track serves this whole barren region, so beset by drought and desolation. The sparse number of passengers often includes a few courageous tourists. A journey of discovery through a land that offers the forbidding beauty of a featureless landscape. When the Maghreb was under French colonial rule, this train went to a large phosphate mine located in the heart of these barren mountains at the edge of the Sahara. The train was the only means of shipping the phosphorite rock dug out of the Metlawi mountains to processing plants. When the phosphate trade ceased, it seemed that the railway would die with it. But the train has found a new raison d'etre. It now plays a totally different role as part of the worldwide circus of international tourism. In this case, the sightseeing attraction is quite unique, an apparently unlimited view of nothing. But first impressions can be deceptive. Groups of hunters and herdsmen once lived in these valleys. Stones chipped off and shaped into arrowheads are evidence of Stone Age man's presence here in prehistoric times. Between the 8th and the 6th millennia before Christ, every gorge, so arid and void of life today, was a flourishing, fertile valley. The train reaches its destination, an encounter with other, even more intangible ghosts. We've come to the Maghreb's sub-Saharan oases. In the sand and rock beneath the oases, geologists have found fossilized subterranean lakes, reserves of fresh water that supply the vegetation on the ground above. Located hundreds of meters deep, these underground lakes are an indispensable feature of the local ecosystem. Invisible ghosts of the Maghreb Desert. The moisture that seeps off the lakes into the ground above makes life viable in a region where high daytime temperatures would otherwise dry up this small surviving patch of shade and green. Should this underground water reserve dry up because of overexploitation or for geological reasons, the oasis would soon be burnt up by the heat of the sun and die. The last Bedouin nomads are flesh and blood ghosts of the past who can still be seen by travelers who cross the southern edge of the Maghreb. Occasionally, it is possible to come across one of the Bedouins' last surviving caravans. Nightfall at the edge of an oasis is the best time to meet these survivors of a changing world. They always camp in the same places, especially on winter nights, warming themselves around their fires. At this time of the year, the north wind quickly dispels the torrid heat of the day. The Bedouin camel drivers and their beasts of burden protect themselves as best they can from the bitter cold. In this magical setting, with its chiaroscuro play of light, these men look even more like ghosts of themselves. Itinerary brings us back to that uncertain boundary line where the Maghreb desert meets the sea. The ghosts that accompanied us have disappeared in the sunlight, carried far away on the wind, their place taken by the lights and colors of modern life. Of the Maghreb, caught between the Sahara and the Mediterranean, an old abandoned lighthouse is yet another ghostly presence. A 20th century stone ghost. In fact, our world is already beginning to create its own ghosts. Some large, some small, some important, others quite insignificant. Relentlessly, nature will erase both the ghosts of the past and those of the present. A slow process that we humans can barely perceive. Our man-made measure of time is too puny, too limited.